From middle-of-the-night abductions to the proverbial probe, stories of alien encounters are often traumatic. But some people have reported positive and even friendly experiences with ETs. Today, we'll delve into accounts of intergalactic friendships. Welcome to Shadowland, everybody.
Welcome.
This is a podcast that shines a spotlight on stories of the supernatural, mysterious, eerie, and unexplained. Stuff like Atlantis,
Alien implants,
underground cities,
sex magic,
ancient myths,
gnomes,
ghost trains,
spectrophilia,
cryptids.
Underground bases. Wait, did you say that? No.
I did. Well, I said underground cities.
Oh, yeah. Well, bases give me another one, too.
But
Stuff like that.
All that stuff.
All that kind of stuff. And more.
I'm Christina Callery.
And I'm Seth Jablon.
And today we're talking about alien friendships.
That's right. Alien abductions that led to something more. So we've done alien sex. Now we're going to do alien, or no, we haven't done alien sex. We've done ghost sex.
Oh, you gave it away.
No, we're going to do alien sex later. But first we're going to start with the friendships. And then maybe we'll do some scary.
We've got to build. We've got to
build up to it.
Right.
And then maybe we'll do
before they take it to the next level.
Yes. Maybe we'll do some alien, maybe we'll do some scary alien abductions too. But we thought it'd be interesting to talk about the friendships. Because, very often out in the lore and the stories and the media and stuff, they talk about all these scary grays and these horrific experiences people have. But there's other kinds, right?
Super traumatic. You get abducted in the middle of the night. You get taken away and probed on some cold table with these terrifying creatures. And
Right. But there's definitely these ones that I think a lot of them are largely human or humanoid or from local, supposedly from local galaxies or solar systems or whatever that look very much human and that actually strike up friendships. And so we both got stories today about that.
Yes, we do.
So what do you want to do? Do you want to go first?
Sure, I can go first.
Okay, cool.
Okay. So I don't know if you know this one, but my story is about Kursan Ilumzinov.
Oh, okay. Ilumzinov, okay.
The former president of the Russian Republic of Kalmykia.
Whoa, okay. Oh, I didn't see this one.
I don't know.
I don't know this one. I don't know.
Okay. All right. So, just real quick, this is the only Buddhist region in Europe.
Huh.
So he was the president, and at the same time, and I guess it continues until today, he's also the president of the International Chess Foundation. He's held this post since about 1995.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah, but he had
so he's a smart dude is what you're saying.
Yeah. He's a smart dude. And he had an experience that was apparently pretty positive.
Okay, cool. I'm excited to hear it, yeah.
Okay. So, on the evening of September 17th in 1997, and this was during his presidency, he came home to his Moscow apartment after a long day at work. He read a little bit, watched TV before finally going to bed. He was lying in bed with his eyes closed when he heard the door to his balcony open and someone or something calling to him. So he got out of bed, he went out to see what was going on, and at this point he saw what he described as, quote, a semi-transparent half-tube spaceship on his balcony, sort of attached to it.
Whoa.
Okay, unlike maybe what most of us would do, he decided to go investigate it. So
go inside of it? Or just see further what's closer.
He went out onto his balcony. I'm not really sure that it's a little bit hazy on how this ended up happening, but he went out onto his balcony to see what this thing was, and it's there that he encountered human-like creatures wearing yellow spacesuits. but they were aliens. And he said that he began communicating with them, and their meeting seemed pretty friendly from the get-go. He said that like the way that they communicated was like telepathic. It was on a level of the exchange of ideas. That was a direct quote. So just he sort of immediately understood without any words. So he decided like he's going to go onto their interplanetary ship. So they must have invited him. He felt welcomed. And he said that at this point, he started to feel a lack of oxygen. So the aliens then gave him a matching yellow spacesuit so they could be twinsies.
Right.
And one of the aliens pointed to his chest to indicate that the oxygen supply could be regulated by turning a dial on the chest of the spacesuit. So he adjusted it and immediately felt more comfortable, was able to breathe. And he said that the ship was absolutely enormous. This is the one that the tube took him to.
So this was like a little shuttle, and so he's on board this thing in the spacesuit and he's now on the
larger ship. Okay, on a larger ship, yeah. So he said that it was gigantic, and one of its chambers alone was the size of a large football field. Wow. And he said that portals were everywhere. And they kind of they showed him around. They took him on a little tour of the ship. And he said that they gave me a tour and they showed me the command center. And I felt quite comfortable in their company. And then apparently they had to run an errand. So they like brought him along. He said,
they're like, oh shit, we gotta pick something.
Yeah, we gotta do this thing. You want to come with? You can like hang out. So he said we landed on one of the planets and picked up a piece of equipment, and it wasn't for band practice or anything. He said that he was told that they were collecting samples from the planet.
Huh.
Yeah.
From the planet that they were
from a planet that they just kind of like picked up this. I guess they had to make a pit stop somewhere on a different planet. And he said they told me everything in detail, and they wanted to demonstrate that UFOs do exist. So they were being, I guess, kind of transparent with him. So he ended up spending the whole day in outer space.
Sweet.
So I kind of like to imagine like an 80s movie montage where they're all going around doing different stuff. Maybe there's a theme song. I don't know. They're trying on like funny hats and outfits and like... riding tandem bikes.
Moon somewhere.
Yeah. Like they made a day out of it. But like at a certain point, he got a little concerned about being gone too long because he was supposed to go to Ukraine in a couple days to conduct the Youth Government Week.
How topical.
Yeah. So he told the aliens, like, please bring me back. And they were like, no problem, Kirsan, you have time. And he said that they are people like us. They have the same mind and the same vision. As a direct quote. And he said, I talked with them and I understand that we are not alone in this whole world. We're not unique. So after this little adventure, the aliens returned him safe and sound to his apartment and everything was, quote, back to normal. He claimed that while he was hanging with the aliens, 3 of his staff members were present, and they were witnesses to his disappearance. And these were his driver, his minister, and his assistant. So this is pretty key to the story as well. They had come to get him in the morning to take him to the airport, and they were worried when they saw that he wasn't there. He was nowhere to be found. They looked all over his apartment, and they saw that his phone and key, his other belongings, like his keys, were there. So immediately, of course, they think he'd been kidnapped. And they started calling around, checking with acquaintances, just to see if anybody knew about his whereabouts. And no one did. So at this point, they all met in the kitchen and they were trying to formulate a plan for what to do next and how not to alarm the public. I mean, remember, this is like the president of the republic. And suddenly,
right. It's crazy.
Yeah, he's disappeared. What are they going to do? But then all of a sudden, he emerged from his bedroom. And he hadn't been in the apartment before. They'd searched the entire place, so they were pretty shocked. And they were like, what's going on? And he told them, hey, guys, let's eat breakfast and get going to the airport. And then they were like, well, wait a minute, what's happened here? And he told them, I've been in a flying saucer with extraterrestrials.
No biggie.
Yeah. But they were, I guess, like at first offended. They're like, come on,
Right.
this is a serious thing, you know,
Yeah.
what really happened. But then gradually it dawned on them that after a while, this, you know, hey, it could have happened because after all, they looked everywhere. They knew he wasn't home. By the time he appeared, they'd been in his apartment for an hour. So it had been that long before he finally appeared. And he said that after the fact, a few days later, he was cursing himself for not asking the aliens more questions while he was with them. But he did remember them saying something about humans not being ready. And so he thought, well, you know, it's not time for our civilizations to meet just yet.
Right.
So that was kind of the impression he was given by them. They chose him. He didn't have any idea why they selected him. And unlike, you know, a lot of other politicians might do in his place, he talked pretty freely about the encounter eventually. And in spite of people questioning his sanity, like a member of Russian parliament named Andrei Lebedev expressed concern over whether he was fit to govern. And he was also worried that if the abduction did happen, whether he would have revealed any state secrets to the aliens.
God. That's so Eastern European. Like that's what they're worried about.
Right. Well, because like it would be a historic event and it should have been reported to the Kremlin. But in spite of the flack, he said that after telling his story publicly, he got thousands of letters and calls from people who were glad that he wasn't afraid to talk about it. And apparently, this isn't the only incident of its type in the area. UFO phenomena has been reported in the capital of Kalmykia. So, you know, could be that there's something going on there, some kind of hot spot. For example, in 2011, people who lived there reported this radiant, or I guess several radiant glowing rings over the city. But at that time, you know, of course, you know, reporters asked him, and Illuminov said that no aliens came to see him. So it would have been a perfect time if you were making this up to kind of continue the lore, but he didn't have any experiences with it. So he does have an interesting theory about chess, though, and that is that it comes from space. So
the game was like designed in space, you mean?
Yeah, yeah. He said because it's the same rules, 64 squares, black and white, and it's the same in Japan and China and Mongolia and Africa. The rules are the same. Why? I think maybe it is from space. There was no internet before. Because this is reasoning right here. Not done yet. There was no internet before. So how did chess get across the world? It means that it was brought from somewhere.
Okay. That's a pretty big leap, but...
So that is the story of Kirsan Illuminov.
Wow, that was pretty great. I mean, it's crazy that he was a, you know, sitting president at the time. You know, and that, you know, he was so free about it. I mean, I feel like there's actually been other presidents. I feel like there's, I can't remember right now, but I feel like there's a female one, maybe from like South America or something. I can't remember, who also talked about having abduction experiences or meetings with extraterrestrials. But it makes you like think like who, you know.
I think there's also a potential congresswoman.
Oh, right. But yeah, it's like, I feel like one of the things that are always questioned in these stories is like, well, is this a good witness? And I'm like, who, like, what would people accept? Like, who is the one person that people would actually accept as like, okay, we believe you because of your of some sort of qualifications, you know? Like, I feel like there's been so many different types of people that have had these experiences. There seems to be no one acceptable in the sort of greater, you know, context that people are like, you know, definitely on board with. They always seem to like sort of question their sanity or think they're making it up for, you know, to be famous or whatever. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, Canada's former defense minister.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Is
he's huge in the Disclosure Project. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, you know, you would think someone like that would definitely have a lot to lose by talking about. I mean, even the the mayor of Phoenix, saw the Phoenix lights and stuff like that, but then sort of went on to make fun of it all. But
yeah.
But it's interesting.
Well, I mean, I guess this guy's pretty wealthy and,
Right.
and powerful, and it's possible he was just like, fuck it.
Bored or something.
Yeah, I don't know.
But it's interesting that there was someone there to corroborate, that something happened. He disappeared, right? That's odd, right? For someone to disappear from a house and then reappear and have more than one witness. These people, he's gone long enough. I'm sure they, searched, the entire apartment, which, certainly his bedroom or whatever. And then he appears. That's odd, right? So something happened. Mm-hmm. But,
and the descriptions are pretty specific, and they diverge a little bit from, just like the common alien lore.
Yes. Did he talk about like their physical descriptions at all, or just that
not a whole lot?
Humanoid?
Just that they were humanoid. Yeah,
Right.
They were humanoid in the yellow spacesuits.
Interesting. Cool. All right. Well, that's a good one. I didn't. Yeah, I thought you were actually going to do a different one, but I like that one. I hadn't heard that one before. And I mean, that's like pretty recent. I mean, it's late 90s. I mean, I guess it's almost 20 years ago now. But still.
He didn't start talking about it, I don't think, until the early 2000s. But.
Right. Interesting. Cool. Okay. Are you ready for my story?
I'm ready.
Okay. All right. This is going to be a different one, but there's going to be some similarities here. But this is the story of Woodrow Derenberger and Indrid Cold.
Ooh. Okay.
Okay. So, this is one that's definitely probably a story that's familiar to some, but it's also like, I feel like the story that goes around isn't the full story or isn't the actual, the whole encounter. So I'm going to try and tell as much of it as I can. But basically the story begins on November 2nd, 1966, around 7:30. Woodrow was driving home, returning from Marietta, as they say, Ohio, to his home in Mineral Wells, West Virginia. He was driving along the Interstate 77 near Parkersburg, West Virginia, when a vehicle passed his truck and blinked its lights, to go around him. And then as that vehicle passed, directly behind it was this sort of strange ship. And at first he thought it was
like a spaceship on the ground.
Yeah, like a spaceship. No, at first he thought it was a car, but then he saw it didn't have lights on, and also it was flying.
Okay.
So he later described it about 45 to 65 feet long, shaped like a kerosene lamp, and then it sort of zoomed in front of him, turned sideways, and touched down on the highway, basically blocking all the traffic. He said a man emerges from the craft, and as soon as he did, the ship rises up and hovers about 50 to 100 feet from the ground, like nearby, right? So he does sort of stop traffic for a moment and then moves out of the way and walks over to his car. As he walks over to him, he crosses in front of his headlights, so he gets a pretty good view of him. He says the man was grinning broadly and dressed in a dark suit. And I'm going to read some of his own words about it. I could see him very plainly in the headlights. He had a very pleasant appearance and was about 5 feet 10 or 5 feet 11 inches tall and weighed approximately 180 to 185 pounds. His hair was very dark and thick and combed straight back over his head. He seemed to have a very good tan and looked normal in every way.
Tan.
He talks about the tan a lot. He said later in an interview, he looked perfectly natural and normal as any human being. And I don't believe he looked any different from any other man that one would meet on the street. So after that, the man walks around to the passenger side window and motioned for him to roll down the window. Derenberger said that the stranger the whole time was sort of beaming this very pleasant smile at him. And he began to hear the man's thoughts in his own head. So he was speaking to him, but he was, speaking to him telepathically.
So we've got the telepathy again.
Yep. And so basically he told Woodrow that he could either, speak his answers aloud or just think them in his head. And so he starts with, nice to meet you, Mr. Derenberger, and told him his name was Cold. He asked him if he worked for a living and if he had to do so. And Derenberger said yes, that he was a salesman. He was actually a typewriter salesman, I think. And the man replied that he himself was a searcher. That was the word he used to describe himself. He went on to tell him not to be frightened and that he wished him to do no harm, only happiness. And Derenberger remarked at what he called his very pleasant smile and that he kept his arms folded with his hands tucked under his armpits the entire time.
Wait.
So, yeah, which is interesting, right?
So they're crossed and sort of under his...
Yeah, like he's like got his hands tucked under his armpits. Kind of reminds me of like the aliens in Kellyville, where they're sort of like come at you with their arms up, like I feel like it's some sort of like way of communicating, like I'm not going to attack you or something.
Or he's got like really long, scary fingers. Or maybe
he's got super scary fingernails. So the man then asked him what the lights were in the distance, and Derenberger, said he thought he was talking about Parkersburg, and he told him it was Parkersburg, and it was a city. He asked him if all the people there, lived there, and Derenberger said that it was a place of business and trade. The man then said that where he came from, they called such a place a gathering. And then he quoted him as saying, "Mr. Derenberger, look at me. I am the same as you are. I sleep and breathe and bleed, even as you do." It's interesting here to note that in his recounting...
That's not weird at all.
I know. But he definitely, had this experience of this man being very pleasant and friendly.
Right. I was going to ask you about that, because I think a lot of times in these situations, at least with the Men in Black, they'll mention a smile, but that it looks really forced and there's something off about it. Like it's a forced grin, like the creature doesn't really understand the subtleties.
Right. I feel like that gets colored onto this story a lot in some of the retellings. But if you read his interviews and his descriptions, he wrote a book actually about it. He definitely doesn't put it that way. He definitely felt a friendliness from this person, but he definitely was afraid. He said that Cold must have perceived some sort of fear in him because he kept reassuring him. But he definitely makes all these points of saying that, the conversation was dreamlike, and even though he was speaking telepathically, he felt no pain or discomfort, right? He really goes out of his way to say that this guy was like very pleasant, and it wasn't a terrifying experience. It's just scary seeing someone fucking, climb out of a spaceship and like walk over to your car. Even just someone walking over to your car at night on a highway is, it's just, primordial,
I would have been out,
survival, your pulse is going to rise. You're going to, get adrenalized and all that. But he said the man kept, saying, "Have no fear. We mean you no harm." And then he asked him why he was frightened, because his country was not nearly as powerful as his was. He went on to tell Derenberger to report the incident to the local officials and that he would confirm the story at a later date. The man went on to say that he would meet with him again, and they continued to talk for about 10 minutes until the ship descended from the place it was hovering and settled beside his truck. He said Mr. Cole then walked over to the ship where a door opened. Another human hand reached out, pulled him in, and then the ship made a soft fluttering sound and then flew off. So that was basically his first encounter. He basically goes home, tells his wife, and they have a whole discussion about it, and they decide to call the police. He soon after that, he's actually interviewed by a local journalist, Glenn Wilson, on live television. And there's actually transcripts of this interview online. And then tapes are actually on display at the Mothman Museum in Point Pleasant, which of course I've been to. It's interesting to note this.
That's weird. Why are they connected?
Okay, so a couple of reasons. Intercode's often sort of conflated with the Mothman, sort of wrapped up into it. And there's a couple of reasons why. Number one, this happened, I think, 7 or 12 days before the Silver Bridge collapse. So it happened almost right at the same time. There was also, it also happened quite close to, so Parkersburg, I guess, is quite close to Point Pleasant. And then there was a number of people that had the sort of, quote, smiling man experiences around this time as well, including in Point Pleasant. Now, there's definitely some contention about whether or not Injured Cold is connected to the smiling man, or if those things have been sort of conflated, right? Because a lot of the smiling man descriptions are usually pretty terrifying, right?
Yeah, they're creepy. That's what I was referring to.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly. And if you look up, we'll post some stuff on the Instagram, but if you look up drawings of Injured Cold, they're all super creepy. Like he doesn't really look fully human. He's smiling with this almost sort of sinister smile on his face. And a lot of the smiling man stories, I think some boys had an experience maybe weeks or months before Derenberger had this experience, and I think there was some after as well that were more in that sort of smiling man. I think people have even connected that to the smiling man to sort of Spring Heel Jack and all that. But we'll definitely do a story on him at some point. But yeah, so that's why I kind of wanted to like focus on this part of the story, because it actually had nothing to do with, like at least according to Woodrow, it had very little to do with what happened at Point Pleasant. What did happen later was the author of the Mothman prophecies sort of wrapped Injured Cold into the story and had him be this sort of harbinger of the, teller of the coming disaster, right? And so that's how he eventually became sort of mortalized as this sort of urban legend, almost like a cryptid, right?
Mm-hmm. It was just timing.
It's timing and locality, right? It's very close to, and there was just a lot of stuff happening in Point Pleasant at that time, right? Beyond the Mothman, there was tons of UFO activity and sightings, alien sex. I think there was like a school teacher that said he was abducted and had sex with an alien, and just lots of stuff was happening there. But the story of Woodrow actually goes on quite a bit longer than Point Pleasant even, right? A lot of that stuff sort of came to a head at the Silver Bridge collapse, and then sort of died out over the next couple of decades, whereas this is really actually just the beginning of Woodrow's story. So after this, he's evaluated by doctors and psychiatrists who said there's nothing wrong with him, right? I mean, this guy is like, he's an Ohio, typewriter salesman. This is not some like weirdo guy. He's like, as normal as you're going to get, as Midwestern as you're going to get. And in addition to
we have weirdos here, Seth.
Yeah, no, but you know what I'm saying? Like in terms of, not that type of weirdo. Yeah, no, I always think that if I ever got abducted by aliens, no one would believe me because, but, so yeah, weirdo in a good way even. But, yeah, so, a number of witnesses even corroborated the events, right? So this happened on a highway, and, so after he went on the news, I think people came in and studied the whole thing. There's journalists questioning people. I think the FBI even came at one point, and they talked to witnesses, and witnesses corroborated the events. People saw the lights. People said they saw him talking with a man fitting the description on the side of the road. So this definitely happened. Whether who this person was is certainly a mystery, but something happened to this guy, right? That people even saw happen. And then, he goes on to have a number of meetings with Indrid over the years, many more encounters. But I think they even start with him having this sort of telepathic relationship, right? Which I think is very often in these sort of friends with aliens stories, right? Like that they're visited and then a year later they might hear from them telepathically, or it tends to be a theme. But he even goes on to say that, Indrid essentially becomes a family friend. He visits him at his home. He meets his daughter. He meets his wife. He says that he even meets more friends and the wife of Indrid himself.
What do they do? Does he play board games?
I think they just talk. Like a lot of the descriptions in his book was like him just coming there, talking about his life, talking about his planet. he said he met Carl Ardo, his sort of second in command. He said he also met his wife Kimmy, which I fucking love, and another guy named Daryl. I just think that's like the funniest. That there's one of the aliens on the ship's name was Daryl.
Daryl. Oh, wow, that's pretty great.
I think something happened. So I think, all right. So my well, let me tell the rest of the story, and then I'm going to give my sort of personal assessment, because it's a complicated story for sure.
Okay.
So, but something happened to him. Lights and UFOs were seen around him, around his backyard. Neighbors would actually even go there over the years to see the UFO land or to see lights in the sky. So this was something that was definitely accepted in the community. Now, so for a while, he was just sort of a curiosity. Unfortunately, Derenberger claims that eventually the Men in Black came to visit him and began harassing him and harassing his friends, harassing his family. And this is where things began to take a turn for the worse for him, right? Eventually, the community turns on him. His friends turn on him. They start getting harassed by Men in Black and people calling them, telling them not to talk about these experiences. He starts to have marital problems. And so I think he moves away, eventually moves back. I think he ends up getting divorced, or I can't remember exactly what happened, but he even disappears for 6 months. And when he returns, people ask him where he's been. He said that Indrid Cold took him to see his planet. Eventually, he writes this book.
That's it?
Huh?
No more details?
No, there's actually quite a few details. So there's almost too many to sort of go over here. He does talk about going to see his planet, which is called Lanulos.
Lanulos?
Lanulos.
Okay. Sounds like a skincare ingredient.
It does. And it's in the galaxy Ganymede. So he actually, in his book, he actually talks quite a bit about the planet. And this is where I think the story kind of goes off the rails a little bit for me. I mean, he talks about this world, this sort of nudist utopia that Cold is from, right? That like he goes there and like everyone's nudists. He talks about their malls. He talks about the sports, and it sounds.
What do they sell in the malls? Not clothes.
Everything. No, like he's like, talks about like the ovens they use and like, all the appliances, and it's very interesting. It's very strange. If you're a completist, I mean, it's definitely worth a read. It's very poorly written, but it's very interesting. It's called Visitors from Lanulos.
Do they have food courts at the malls?
I think he really goes into the malls, but he talks about how they live and like, that it's like weird.
I have to read this.
Yeah. He said it was like, weird for him to wear clothes. So when he would go nudist there, and like everyone was very beautiful and like, but I think he even lives there for a little while. My personal sort of belief is that, he may have made some of this stuff up, certainly. It's sort of smacks of it a bit. Like, like you have this guy, Indrid Cold, that sounds like some cool alien name, but then he meets a guy named Daryl. It's just, there's some really odd parts to it. But something definitely happened to this guy. And I think in some of these stories, I think there's that Swedish guy who had all these experiences, and then he went on to like fake photographs of it. Like, I think something might happen with people when they have these experiences. They know they have an experience. What happens, we don't know. What actually happened, we don't know. But we know something happened, right? He was interviewed by all these people. He was, interviewed by psychologists. He was interviewed on television. His account of this is crystal clear, right? It's corroborated, right? But then to have ultimately no one really believe him or think he's crazy, maybe over the years it's, you have a spaceship landing in your backyard, maybe like feeling like no one believes you, maybe your grip on reality maybe shifts a little bit. I don't know. That's my sort of personal, that he may have embellished. And I think.
So you think it's kind of like a mix?
I think it's a mix
of truth and made up shit.
And I think that's also what his family says. His daughter, who apparently met Indrid Cold, went on to say, some of it was true and some of it she believes he might have, eventually made up. Basically, this goes on for quite a long time until he basically disappears. But then sort of becomes wrapped into this whole urban legend of the Grinning Man and the Mothman prophecies and all that. But anyways, it's definitely worth a read. It's definitely like, he is definitely like a big character in this, like, in these sort of abduction stories. His is, a very specific, event that, it's worth evaluating, I think. And yeah, anyways, that's the story of Woodrow Durenberger and Injured Cold.
Wow, that was great.
Yeah.
And I think I really want to read about the shopping malls, the alien, the space malls.
And he talks about their sports. He says they like ski, and he talks about
they ski.
He said, was this him or was all right? I might be conflating the stories, but with Valiant Thor, but I'm pretty sure he talks about how like they have cheeseburgers there and they're like super good.
Are they beef or something else, or he just didn't ask?
No, I think they're beef. I don't know.
Okay.
He said the food there is
maybe that's what all of the
tastes
cattle mutilations are.
Maybe they're making
making
dope
burgers.
Cheeseburgers. Anyways, but it's a very interesting story. And yeah, if you go to Point Pleasant, like there's definitely a bunch of stuff about him. I saw some of the notes in the tapes. I don't remember if I listened to them there or not, but it's definitely like wrapped into part of their history now too. Yeah, so that's
super fascinating.
Yeah, so that's Friends with Aliens. I feel like we should do this one again too. I really enjoyed it.
There were more actually as I started looking into it.
Yeah,
there were more.
Yeah, and I know this one's sort of like a very classic one, but it's a one worth telling because, like I said, like there's so many times he gets sort of wrapped up as the Smiling Man, or the stories that go around about Injured Cold, are more related to the Silver Bridge and to Point Pleasant than.
And they're generally
Woodrow's.
Creepier, the ones that I've heard.
Yes, they're very
creepier.
creepy, which
yeah.
Durenberger definitely does not describe him that way. He quite often describes him as a very spiritual person, and that he helped him in his life spiritually.
What about Daryl? What was Daryl like?
I don't know. Yeah. But he talks quite a bit about Carl Ardo visiting him. So like he had his own experiences with him as well. So cool. All right. Well, that's our Friends with Aliens episode. First one back from Spooktober.
Yes.
A couple weeks here, but yeah, that was fun.
And we've got more things in the works. We're going to have special episodes for Thanksgiving in November.
Yep.
We're going to be doing some Native American stories.
Yep.
Also, if you're liking the podcast, we would love it if you would give us a review.
Oh yeah, definitely. Rate and review. Definitely helpful for us. We always love to hear from people, and that's a great way for us to get feedback. So.
Also, if you have any stories or you have any ideas, things that you'd like us to cover in upcoming episodes, you can write us at shadowlandpodcast@gmail.com.
Yep. Cool. All right. Well, that was fun. Do you feel good about it?
I feel pretty good.
All right, cool. So I guess until next time.
All right. Until next time.
Bye. Shadowland Podcast is produced by Seth Jablon and Christina Callaghan. Edited by Tim Kelly. Theme music by Tim Lincoln.
Thanks, Tim.